Well, welcome. So my name is Carrie Lee. I'm the interim director of the Career Planning Development Center here in St. Louis.
And my name's Cassie. I'm an assistant director, also at the St. Louis location.
So today we're going to be talking about making a career change and just kind of some tips and strategies for thinking through that process. So in terms of overview, just kind of some statistics and information. Most individuals will make some kind of career change within their lifetimes. In the past, it was a lot more common for people to maybe stay in the same career or at the same employer for a good chunk of their career, but that's really becoming much more and more rare. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a government agency. They track all those numbers about unemployment in the U.S., a lot of different information about the labor market. And so they showed that baby boomer generation had an average of 12.7 jobs over their career. So they don't have that full longitudinal data for younger generations yet, but it's definitely likely that it will be even higher for, our younger generations like Gen X or millennials or Gen Z, because that average length of time in a job has been continually declining as well. So most people are only going to be in a position for a few years. So whether they're staying in the same industry or career, they're just moving up or making some kind of a change. And Gallup is another entity that does a lot of research. And so their report from last summer had 32% of employees surveyed reported being actually engaged at work, and 16% were actively disengaged. So, really, it is pretty common that the majority of employees don't particularly feel engaged with their work. They may not be deciding for sure they want to make some kind of a change, but they're maybe not being as engaged as could be in an ideal situation.
And when you're considering a change, you want to take into account these questions. What aspects do you dislike about your current path? Are you feel like there's anything missing from your current career so far? And are those related to the things that are missing? Are they related to a specific job or industry or maybe a specific employer? Maybe it's not the work itself, but the work setting, or maybe it's an entirely new career that it's really specific to. So where, if you're missing something, where does that piece exist elsewhere? And what is going to be most important to you in the long term as far as career satisfaction? Maybe you have some short-term goals coming up, but then what comes after for like a long term, what's going to make you happy now and then kind of thing. So those are all some things that you want to start trying to consider, and maybe put some answers to help guide your path.
So, when we talk about making career decisions, there's kind of these core areas that you really want to think of as the foundation to making these decisions. So, thinking about your interests, what do you like doing? What do you not like? What are your strengths and those things that you feel like you're naturally good at? The skills that you already have, how are they kind of aligning with what you're thinking about going into? Your personality style. So if you're somebody that's introverted, do you want to be a teacher where you're being in a classroom with children for 8 hours a day? Is that overwhelming, or is that something that would be a good fit for you because you're like being extroverted, you like talking to people all day? So those are things that you want to consider. Those career values. So these are really not a right or wrong. It is just, what do you personally care about? So if you're somebody that has family members that you're caring for and you really appreciate having a more flexible schedule, like that might be something that is most important to you when you're looking at jobs or careers. Maybe you care about a high salary potential because you are looking to buy a house in the near future. whatever it is, if it's something where you feel like you want to feel like you're working somewhere that fits with your sense of ethics, that you feel like you're able to make a positive social impact in the world, it's not a right or wrong. It's just, of those values, what do you care most about that's going to impact your decision? And then thinking about those things with lifestyle too. There are some jobs that maybe have more of an opportunity for, hybrid, a flexible schedule versus, if something is really in person, hard to probably do a lot of manufacturing work online. So those things that may be kind of different from industry to industry or particular roles. So the better that you understand yourself and these kind of core areas, that's going to help you make a better and more informed decision. So if you're just kind of starting this process, you're thinking through some of these things, the Life Values Inventory is a free online assessment to just kind of help you think through, of those career values, what are most important to you. So it will make you an account with your email so you can save your results and go through those. But yeah, there's no fee or anything for that kind of basic assessment. And the ONET Interest Profiler is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that kind of assesses your interests. So what do you like in a career? What do you not like doing in terms of task? So those can be some really good places to get started.
Once you figure out maybe which direction you would like to go in, then you want to think about how much of a change that will be for you. So what is the scale of the change? Are you thinking about, staying somewhere in the realm of moving from a high school teacher into a curriculum coordinator that's still in the school environment, still planning lessons, that kind of thing? Or are you thinking about something drastically different and going from a sales rep to wanting to be a registered nurse? That's going to require some additional education. And so obviously it is easier if it is a smaller scaled change than it would be to make a drastic change, as those larger changes do take a little bit more time and effort, earning new degrees or maybe certifications or licensures or different things like that. Some may also depend on the state that you're in. And so it may be, not as big of a change in certain states, but then if you end up moving states, the credentials that you need need to be entirely different. So those are all things to consider when you're trying to figure out your next steps and figure out how big of that change is, to kind of figure out your smaller steps to get you there.
And it's also useful to sometimes try and tease out what feels more like a passion project and something that you really enjoy doing, as a hobby versus what do you want to actually do as your career. Because everybody is going to have a variety of interests, and those are things where you may not have all of your interests incorporated into your career or in one job. So it doesn't mean that you can't incorporate more of those if you feel like you're missing some of that, but it's not always the right call for everybody. So, if your dream is to be a novelist and just work full-time writing, it may not be, with your life responsibilities, the most fiscally responsible choice to just quit your job and focus on writing. But it doesn't mean that you couldn't start taking steps that way. So, start working on that, kind of have a more intentional schedule for your output, or joining a writer's group to kind of keep you accountable and get feedback on your work. So there's things where if you're looking to maybe fulfill those interests and make a change, it may be something that you can kind of incrementally still do, and not jump 100% in right away to see how that goes. Or, if you're deciding like, yes, this is truly what makes sense for me, I'm making an informed decision, that may be the right call for you. And you also want to kind of think about, if you are having to produce a certain amount of deliverables in a set amount of time, sometimes that can really impact people's enjoyment. You know, where if somebody really enjoys, you know, art and design work, but if you have to turn out a certain number of illustrations for your company, for your job at a greeting card company, you might feel like, am I being able to use my creativity? Am I feeling constrained and I don't have the time or energy to devote to my own projects that I'm more interested in? So, you know, that's going to be different for everybody. Like, there's not one absolute right or wrong. It's figuring out what is right for you.
And you want to make sure that you're conducting research along the way, especially if the type of role that you want to change into is going to require that additional qualification or education or certification. Be looking up those roles that you're interested in now to see maybe what requirements they have for hiring. Kind of look and do that proper research to kind of understand what it will take to get you there. And also doing that job search kind of in advance will also help you understand what kind of opportunities are out there already. So that by the time you do get that education, you can kind of have an understanding of what the market might be like. You know, markets change if you're in school for a little while, but it can kind of give you a good sense of what it could be like. And you can also get a good understanding of, okay, you already meet these requirements, but these are areas that you need to enhance maybe while you're getting that additional certification or degree, while you have time to prep for yourself. You can also learn about what the typical salary will be for those types of roles, what the projected job growth is, will the market stay full of jobs like that? How competitive is it to get the type of role that you want? Are there any geographic limitations? If you want to change careers to be a marine biologist, moving out of Missouri is probably required for that at some point. So different things like that. And looking at those real postings is going to be really helpful because you're going to see exactly what they're looking for, exactly what you are missing, and kind of those, again, helping you plan those small next steps forward to get you to that bigger career leap down the way. And oh, Carrie, I think, is this your slide? Sorry.
You know, that's okay. So yeah, I think this one's of mine. So there are kind of a variety of sources you can use for research. So Cassie mentioned, you know, looking at those active job postings. So whether they're on, you know, LinkedIn, Indeed, Handshake, Glassdoor, other different job boards, you know, kind of getting a sense of what is out there, what are current requirements that employers are looking for. ONET is one I mentioned a little bit earlier. So like I said, it is a site developed with that information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So ONET has a lot of different ways you can search for information. So for instance, you can search for a particular career like accounting and see, you know, here are common job titles, here's what type of like software, technical skills are required, what's kind of a basic job description, what's the projected job growth, what's a typical education level. And you can also kind of search more broadly. So if you're interested in, you know, maybe health careers, but you're not quite sure which one, you can kind of come up with those as a list. So it's a really comprehensive site. The Occupational Outlook Handbook, kind of also coming from those same data sets, but it's a little bit different look. So what I would say is the OOH is more of that kind of cluster. So if you're kind of thinking, maybe I want to do something in business, I'm not quite sure. It's very similar information as ONET. It's just kind of a different format. And there's not as many individual careers because some of those are kind of more of those broader groups. So some people might like one site over another, but I would definitely encourage anybody to use those as a starting point for your research because as with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS site has tons and tons of information. There's always new reports every month. And some of those are kind of those broader labor market settings. So for instance, like what's the unemployment rate? What industries have had new job growth in the last, whatever period of time you want to look at. So some of those kind of bigger changes in the job market and things, that's a good place for that type of research.
Next, you want to consider what it would be like to gain experience in your intended career field. This will really help you determine if it's a good fit for you. And that is going to be a great, way to get you started on kind of figuring out what you do like about that place, what you don't like about that place. Does it feel realistic? And will also increase your competitiveness as an applicant. And so having direct experience in the field will make you more hireable later on. And it also shows that you're doing all that you can to gain that experience that may be needed to do that career switch. So it shows that you're committed to making that change and you're making it intentionally. It's been well thought out and you're not just kind of haphazardly changing something and jumping into the next thing. It shows that you've done the research and you're being very specific and methodical about it. So this could include, job shadowing, volunteer hours, internships in those fields, any of those types of things, or even, informational interviews to give you a sense of, this person works in this field or with this industry or with this employer. How did they get to where they are? Do they have any recommendations on if they were to do it again? All of those types of things gives you a good glimpse into that field that you're looking into.
So in terms of kind of an employer perspective, NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And so they do a lot of research with employers and what they're looking for in terms of new graduates. So one of the questions that they ask, this is from data from last year, but you can kind of see some comparative years as well, is when two equally qualified candidates apply, what makes an employer choose one over another? So 5 is kind of the most impactful, 1 is the least. So as you can see, obviously, in an ideal circumstance, if you've already completed an internship or you've worked at that company before, you know how they operate, what their types of processes are like. But there's really a minuscule difference between that and just having, any internship experience in your industry. And then, do you have a relevant major? Do you just have any work experience? Have you held a leadership position, whether that's, in a student involvement setting, whether that's in a professional organization, whatever it might be. So you can see that there are a variety of things that employers do care about. And so as you're kind of gaining experience, as Cassie mentioned, there's different valid ways to show your interests and your knowledge and your skills and experience. So, things like having a high GPA is great. It's not that that's not helpful, but those other things are going to be probably a little bit more impactful for employers. So if you are kind of above a certain threshold where you're meeting maybe some of those minimum cutoffs, it's not so much of, well, do you have a 3.7 versus a 3.8, unless you're applying to medical school or something, it's going to be more about what have you done outside of class 2 and how does that relate?
And these are all the different types of experience that you could try and get kind of under your belt as you consider this change. So if you're getting new certifications or new education, then your coursework will probably be directly related to that field. Any projects for that coursework specifically or personal projects are ways that you can get some direct experience. Research, again, personal or for academic purposes. There may be both formal or informal training on some specific skills. LinkedIn Learning can give you some maybe informal training, and then formal would be more of a certification process or a course that you take. Getting involved, like Carrie said, in those student organizations is really great to get some of those interpersonal skills developed. Potentially joining professional organizations that are related is a great way to kind of explore the industry as well as gain some of that kind of knowledge of the area as well. Joining committees, internships, and then obviously some roles on campus could be related to something that you're looking at. Again, the full or part-time roles or freelance. So if you're looking to, go into the book editing industry, there's a lot of freelance editing, copywriting opportunities out there to get you some a direct experience in that realm. And then volunteering your time is another way to do that as well. If you ever end up volunteering regularly and you are an international student, just make sure that you declare your volunteer work to International Student Services so that you stay in visa compliance. And so these are the resources that you can use to explore some of those directions. So if you want to get involved on campus, there is Involved at Webster. It has all those student organizations on there. If you are interested in a topic area that doesn't have a student organization already created, you can connect with SGA to see if you're able to create your own organization. Maybe there's a couple other people that want to join you. That gives you both that student organization and leadership experience. Each semester, Webster has that research across disciplines presentation opportunity that you can present any relevant related research. LinkedIn Learning is free to all Webster students. And so you can log in with your Webster email to get some of that maybe non-certified, training or exposure to some of those skills. Getting involved or volunteering can be done at those links there. So Idealist, United Way, and Charity Navigator. We have resources in our office. Our workshops and events can help get you exposed to different types of roles. We have a variety of different employer events. We'll have employer panels. We had a panel a couple weeks ago on careers and sustainability. There are all sorts of employer hosted events in Handshake. These are hosted every day. They're virtual and more always popping up and getting approved. So definitely check those out because those are going to be great ways to hear directly from recruiters on specific hiring programs, different opportunities they have, that kind of thing. Check out our topical career guides on our connections page. We also have some great resources embedded in those. And then there are some community career resources like America Job Centers, or your local library will have some great career resources. And then again, those professional associations, sometimes they'll create their own job boards or do event mixers where you can meet with people in the industry and share different opportunities and things that way as well.
So, as you've been kind of doing some research, if it looks like you might have to do an additional degree, some type of credential to really get into the career of your choice, kind of feel out of, is this something that is required? If you want to be a counselor, you have to have a counseling degree and have licensure for that. Or if it's something that is, recommended, like if you're going to go into accounting and be a CPA, it's likely that you would need a master's degree, but it doesn't mean there aren't roles that don't require that CPA license. So if you're looking at that additional education, there's some things that you always want to be thinking about. So obviously, like, what is the tuition cost? Are there funding opportunities? So do they have scholarships? Do they have fellowships, which are essentially kind of scholarships more at the graduate level. So kind of supporting you and being able to do your research, you know, if you're doing a PhD and work on your dissertation. And then assistantships for graduate students are usually ones that require work. So for instance, when I did my master's degree, I worked as a graduate assistant in the Career Center. So I worked for them, and then that paid my tuition. So depending on the type of university, the department, what opportunities, that's going to vary a lot. So it's always good to look into those things. You know, what are the living expenses like? Obviously, you're going to have to pay way more if you're doing a program in New York versus if you're doing one in St. Louis, or rural, you know, area somewhere. If you are currently working, and so you would, you know, take time off from your current role and go full time to school, you know, thinking about that kind of lost earnings, or if it's something where your kind of life responsibilities would allow you to work at the same time as going to school, that's going to be different for everyone. And what are those expected salary earnings? So, you know, if you're looking at like job postings, you're looking at that own it data and things to see the amount that you would be spending on tuition, on living expenses, lost earnings. Does that something that financially makes sense? You know, if you're having to take out loans, do you feel like you would be able to pay those back in a reasonable amount of time? And, you know, what's the program duration? Like, there are some programs or credentials where maybe it's like a 6-month commitment, a year, 2 years. If it requires a PhD and that's 4 to 7 years of your life, that's obviously a much bigger commitment. And, you know, how do you learn best? So there are some programs that are only in person, some that are hybrid, some that are online. So thinking about how do you learn well, what works for your lifestyle, and then also what's going to help prepare you the best. You know, for instance, there are online counseling programs, but that's something where if you're talking to people all day and that's a very person-centered career, you know, you're probably going to feel a little bit more prepared if you have some of that in-person exposure as opposed to only doing everything online, right? So doesn't mean that there's ever a right or wrong, but you want to think about those things. And then also, what are those alumni outcomes? So different universities, different departments, they may have more or less information on their website. So some have a really good job of tracking that data. Some they may not have the staff power to effectively track it quite as well. You can also look at things like LinkedIn to figure out, you know, what do people do after they get this degree? If everyone's kind of going in one direction and that's not what you're interested in, maybe it's not quite the right program for you. Or maybe you're seeing people where it's kind of not getting you to the point that you think it would. So it's always good to check on those things. You know, look at what are the prerequisites. So, you know, you might have to take some classes. So if you're a current student, is that something you can incorporate? Or if you're graduating, but you want to go into a healthcare program, you might just have to take a few extra classes to make sure that you're meeting those requirements. And understanding those application timelines, because depends on the type of program. There are some that are very structured that, you know, you might be applying to med school more than a year in advance of when you would start. You know, so if you're kind of missing that, you may have to wait an entire another year for that next application cycle versus if programs admit students every semester, it might only be a couple of months to know if that's something that you can do.
You also want to make connections via networking. And so like those informational interviews that we talked about, this can help you learn more about the field, you know, your job research and your job search a little bit more smooth. And so you don't necessarily have to get that learned experience firsthand if you're able to connect with people and learn about their journeys and learn maybe some easier ways to get to a specific pathway that you're interested in. That can definitely be something that you ask them in those interview type things to get their perspective. It's important to note that sometimes people will only consider those warm connections where, you have a friend who knows someone who works in a place that you're interested in. That's a warm connection because that mutual friend or mutual person can introduce you to. Those are great, but don't forget about those cold connections. Those cold connections are people that you don't necessarily know before, but maybe you both went to Webster and that's the only thing you have in common. And you're interested in what they're doing now. Cold connections still impress people. And so reaching out and being respectful and telling them why you want to connect and what you're hoping to learn out of the experience, most of the time people are willing to share some advice that they've learned and pass that on to someone else. So don't forget about those cold connections if you're using those warm connections too. And some tools to use this could be Webster Links is a social media page that the Alumni Association has developed. And so they're trying to get current students and Webster alumni to join. They have a good following so far. In the future, there are opportunities for mentoring matchups, different events are shared on the page and things like that. So that is a great way to try and get connected with people who went to Webster and, are open to mentoring and things like that. Using that LinkedIn alumni tool to filter through the alumni on the Webster page to see maybe where they work now, based on what city they live in, based on what they studied at school. That is a great way to get connected with people, to learn more about an area of interest. And then just getting connected to the Webster Alumni Association in general is great. You can attend any events that they have and be able to talk to people face to face to learn a little bit more about what their journeys have been like.
And, when you are making a career change, you're applying to those new opportunities, you want to make sure that your application materials are in good shape. So you always want to make sure, your resume, cover letter, if it's a personal statement for a graduate school program, they're always tailored to your target audience. So, if you're applying to different types of roles, those companies may care about different skill sets, different experiences. So you want to make sure the most relevant information is first, on your resume. If you're doing a degree because you are making that career change, that education section should be right up at the top. So they see that you have a relevant degree and not maybe your work experience that, while useful, is not exactly related. When you're talking about your experiences, you want to focus on connecting those transferable skills. So those are things that are going to be applicable across settings. So things like, leadership, communication, organization. So, if you're making a career change from being a teacher to, wanting to go into the business world, instead of framing it about like, oh, I taught, a class of 23, first graders or something, talking more about, oh, you were, developing training and lesson plans, you were communicating with large groups every day. So kind of broadening it, if that makes sense, to make it more relatable than saying, yeah, here's a specific curriculum I was working on and here's a specific age level, because that's not necessarily what's going to be the most useful information for that other employer. You might also consider breaking up your experiences into more specific sections. So, while you can just have one experience section, you might say, well, this is more of my education experience, and this is my more, like accounting related experience. So that might help to show that kind of distinction. Or maybe if some of your more relevant experience isn't the most recent, that's a way to kind of push that up, is to divide those into different sections. Or maybe you've had a lot of like projects that are related, even if your work experience isn't so much. So maybe you want to push up the project section. And overall, the more that you can emphasize your accomplishments and the impact you had in your role, that's the thing that's going to help you stand out. So instead of just saying, yes, I did reports every month. What was the point of that? Why are you doing those reports? Was that to, you know, help adjust the budget to make sure that, you know, you were staying, you know, fiscally responsible? Was that something where you were able to help save the company money because you realized that, you know, maybe some of these contracts you had weren't really necessary because your customer demographic was changing. So that necessitated some type of change. A summary or an objective might be useful. It's always optional, but if you are making maybe more of a bigger career change, it might help to frame that experience on your resume to kind of talk about very briefly what you're looking for and kind of those qualifications or skills that you're going to carry over.
Some basic resume standards to keep in mind for US style format is you want to make sure that your resume is very clear and consistent throughout. You're trying to make it as easy on the eyes as possible but also specializing each application for each role that you're applying to. Typically, it's 1 to 2 pages. 1 page is standard for those students or early professionals who don't have a ton of things to add to their resume, but it shouldn't ever be longer than 2 pages in the private sector. We recommend that your official Webster degree title be included, especially with your graduation date. This is going to help employers know when you will be done with your additional schooling or your next steps and when you might be ready to work full time, or it'll help them understand, okay, this is where you're at in your program and you're applying to this internship, that kind of thing. Experiences, each one should include your title, the organization name, the dates that you worked there, month and year to month and year, and the location, the physical location, so city and state or city and country that you worked in. And then under each of those experiences should have bulleted descriptions describing what you've done, and they should be free of all grammatical errors, spelling errors, and you typically avoid using those personal pronouns, the I, me, or my statements. They're assumed for a resume and they take up extra space, so it's a lot cleaner if you take those out. Experience should also be listed in reverse chronological order, so the most recent things at the top, and then it goes down to oldest in the last of each section. And we also recommend dates lining up fully on that right side because the more important information, your job title and where you worked, will be on the left. And then if the employer wants to see the time frame, they can scan over to that right side and read the amount of time that you spent in that role over there.
So these are just a couple of examples. So we have these, you know, on our connections page, on our resources. So your resume doesn't have to look exactly like any of these, but just to kind of maybe give you an example of what we mean when we say have those dates on the right-hand side, having kind of that relevant experience. So like the Vivian example, she has 2 different experience sections. You know, she's kind of split those up to have that accounting related first because that's what she's looking for. Like on our Albert sample, you can see, you know, they had multiple roles at the same employer. So they've chosen to have that employer listed first to kind of show that career progression there.
For cover letter tips, you know, they can be specifically impactful when you're considering making the career change, because this is your chance to explain a little bit about why you're wanting to do that change. What passion is kind of driving you forward? Why specifically that company are you interested in? You know, maybe there's a specific clientele that they serve or a specific project that they're working on that you're interested in. But this gives you a chance to explain that why. Because if they're looking at your resume and it has a bunch of transferable experience but no direct experience, they may look for context in that cover letter. And it may not be immediately obvious to them why you're considering this career change. So this gives you a chance to explain. It also gives you a chance to explain the skills that will be transferable, how you are qualified for that transition. And you definitely want to explain why specifically the field that you're going to, but also why specifically that employer or that position. That's going to make you stand out beyond just someone applying to a role and these are my relevant skills. You don't want to emphasize anything that you haven't done that they may be looking for, but you do want to emphasize the relevant skills that you are bringing to the table that are either directly related or transferable. And so you also don't typically want to explain why you're leaving an industry or role or specific career path. You want to focus more on why you're making the change. Why do you want to come and work in this industry or role rather than why are you leaving that old role?
So, some of you probably are already familiar with the SMART goals. It's really a common format if you have, taken some business classes or had to do this for your performance evaluations or something. So it's just a framework to make sure that you're really having clear goals to help you stay on track. So that SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, either relevant or realistic, depending on which source you look at, and then time bound. So, for instance, if you say, okay, I want to get into counseling, this is what I want to do as a career change. So, is it a specific goal? Is this something that can be measured? If you're just saying, I really want to work on my communication skills, that's super broad, right? Like, how are you going to do that? Are you wanting to focus on your written communication skills versus your public speaking skills? And do you have a time frame for that? Is that something that you want to make this shift over the next couple of years? Is that something that you want to start working on immediately? So, kind of think about what are those short term, those kind of next few months, and what's that long term goal? Because, sometimes you may make that big change, and sometimes it might be there's a couple of incremental steps you want to work on in between.
And some final thoughts are that, as Carrie talked about in the beginning, career management is a lifelong skill. There are plenty of people that are moving throughout different careers in their life. It's no longer just a one choice kind of path anymore. And so it's very common to change as you go throughout your life. But something that will help you along the way is making those very informed and intentional decisions are typically going to lead to better outcomes so that you're more prepared for the next steps that you're planning for.
So this is just some of our contact info. So, we have information on our connections department page, on our website. We have an Instagram, where we post about our events and resources. We have our YouTube channel with some of our older webinars and workshops that we've posted, our link to Handshake. So if you have any questions at the moment, we can address those. And otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. And you're welcome to unmute or type in the chat if there's anything you want to discuss more.